We met Jeff Hafley's coordinators for the first time on Wednesday with press conferences for Bobby Slowik, Sean Duggan, and Chris Tabor. I had some thoughts on what they had to say. We're getting into it here on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network. Special thank you to each and every one of you who have helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Locked On NFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Today on the show, we met the coordinators. Yesterday, Jeff Hafley has the introductory statements and introduces each one of the three guys. Has very complimentary things to say about Chris Tabor, about when they found out he was available as the special teams coordinator. We kind of dropped the rest of the list. He talked about how bright he feels Sean Duggan is and kind of his processing speed for seeing things in the box and how quickly he's able to apply things. And then obviously Bobby Slowik, who shared time with Jeff Hafley in San Francisco under Kyle Shanahan, and those learned experiences where Bobby is on the defensive guy and then Kyle plucks him and puts him over on offense and is the latest protege and has 2 years of offensive coordinator experience. We're talking about something that each one of those three guys said. We do have to acknowledge the Dolphins do have a vacancy at quarterbacks coach that they were not expected to have. They had tabbed and Nathaniel Hackett had accepted the position last week. Kind of came out at the beginning of the week that the Cardinals, after hiring Mike LaFleur, might have Nathaniel Hackett on their short list. Bobby Slowik speaks, is asked about Nathaniel Hackett and the assistant coaching staff, and kind of throws his hands up and says, when that list is finalized, that's when we'll talk about him. And like an hour later, Nathaniel Hackett is off to Arizona. So shout out Jeff Hafley. He's been on the job for 3 weeks and got his first poaching off his coaching staff already for Jeff Hafley. So, in the market for a quarterback's coach. I think that'll be an interesting storyline to watch unfold. But I want to start with each one of these coordinators and something that each one of them had to say. The one that stands out to me the most for Bobby Slowik is talking about the passing game and what a good passing game is built on. And it was asked about some of the limitations and the regression from what the Dolphins had before to what they had in 2025. And some of that's with Tua and some of that's with the receivers and the complexities of the offense. He was asked if his offense was going to be simpler than Mike's, and he didn't really say that. But it did stand out to me to hear what he had to say, knowing what we know about what 25 especially, but also 24 had for the Dolphins in offense. So I'm going to read the passage from Bobby Slowik. It's always accumulation of a lot of things when you're struggling or when you're going through a difficult time. I would say specifically for us, I know I really want to make sure that when we're on the field, we're playing as fast as we can, as convicted as we can, so we can hammer the things I've already emphasized for how fast we're going to play, physical we want to play, violent we're going to play, and the effort in which we play. And you have to have mental clarity to do that. So I could already hear like the PTSD alarm bells for Dolphins fans hearing a Dolphins offensive coach talking about conviction, right? That was the whole thing with Tua. He's not playing convicted enough. Well, we're going to bench him because we need more convicted play at quarterback than what we're getting. So it's that buzzword, right? It's like Jeff Hafley when he said, I see better than I hear. I was like, oh, it's a McDanielism. It just popped up in the first 2 weeks. So talking about this all is obviously great, but the actual application of it is where we're going to measure the successes and failures. But this is the right kind of thing to say, especially because I do think it is relevant for what the Dolphins struggled with last year. Bobby continued and said there's always a balance to that because you have to stress the defense. So we'll be demanding in what we have to know mentally. But we're going to balance that with making sure that we can go and physically perform what we need to perform all the time. The pass game, I believe in that wholeheartedly. I think the best way to have a good pass game offense in the NFL is to have a pass game offense that's built on conviction. My experience has always been that the best pass games, but really carries over the run game also. It's the same way across the board. That's how we view it. We had issues with lining up wrong, breaking the huddle, not knowing where we're supposed to be. We had issues with guys running the wrong routes. You could turn on any given game. I could probably pull up 3 or 4 reps where 2 guys run the same route on the same side of the formation. The obvious quarterback element of this, whether it was Tua and his regression in 2025 and lack of trust and confidence in what was around him and the missing conviction in which he was playing, or even in 24, right? You go back to when it was Snoop Huntley and they're playing on Monday Night Football against the Titans, and Mike McDaniel says, well, Snoop's never thrown no-hitch inbreakers before, so it's going to take him some time. Like, he's not convicted because he's never thrown no-hitch inbreakers before, which makes you wonder why you're asking him to throw no-hitch inbreakers, right? But it's always, the last 2 years in particular, it has been a problem. The personnel stuff and the communications and the calls and running out of time to choreograph everything before the snap, like, that's one thing. But it's a thread that ties back to this thing that Bobby Slowik is talking about. And I think the good news for me is this is the kind of thing that can be very easy to identify and should be very easily adjustable. Because it felt like a lot of the time Mike's answer to problems and challenges was to add more layers to it. And then you got too far in and it was, we're out of tight ends. Let's go 6 offensive linemen. Hey, that kind of worked. Hey, we got a rookie quarterback. Let's simplify the pass game and the pre-snap choreography stuff. And it's like, well, you took 3 3/4 seasons on the gig, right? At some point, just having talent and leaning into what the talent is good at to let them play with that confidence. And this was a common theme across all 3 of the coaches that talked, was wanting to play with clarity on what the assignment is so that they can play fast. Make it easy on the players. I don't think that was necessarily the case, for better or for worse, with the group that we just had in Miami. So that is the kind of thing that, do guys know where they're going to break the huddle? Are we burning timeouts because we're not lined up right? Do we have the right guys on the line of scrimmage and the right guys off the line of scrimmage? Are we having to shut down the pre-snap stuff because we ran out of time because the quarterback's yanking this guy across the formation because he's got to start over here and end over here after the motion, but he's got to shift from here to here first, right? Should not be hard to identify. Talent is, and the talent level and baseline and floor and ceiling of your roster is another thing altogether, but this is the kind of stuff that should be easy to see. I like that it's talked about at the very least. But again, you have to go out and do it. And saying it in February is always easier than doing it in October, November, December, and January. Sean Duggan's up next. We're going to talk about something he had to say as it pertains to multiplicity. That's next here, Locked on Dolphins. Stick with us. It's last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before this NFL season officially comes to a close. It's Super Bowl 60. FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding an underdog, building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for, where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger because it is. It's the perfect way to cap off the season, make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to final whistle with FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5, you get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, this season is over. It's the last call for football on FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Finding a doctor near you can feel like it, discovering it, diamond in the rough, if you actually enjoy the experience, right? Sure, you want someone who's in network nearby and has availability, but you want a doctor who listens and makes you feel comfortable and explains things clearly. The kind of doctor does exist. And finding them is easy with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love without all the hassle. We're talking about booking in-network appointments for more than 150 providers across all 50 states, covering 200 specialties from primary care to dentistry to dermatology to eye care. I have definitely been guilty of this before, putting off doctor appointments longer than I should, whether it's scheduling, convenience, kind of not having that doctor that I trust. ZocDoc helps make the process simple and streamlines it for you so it can fit into your day-to-day. You could search by specialty or symptoms and actually build a care team that works for you. You can read verified patient reviews so you feel confident choosing a doctor you'll actually like. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments. Go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL and find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this message. Sean Duggan spoke about a lot of things, and multiplicity was the buzzword, and it became kind of a joke where everybody talks about certain buzzwords for defense, and everybody wants to be all these different kinds of things. I know Joe Shad asked about the wide 9 defense, and Omar asked about being multiple with 3 down and 4 down, and you want to play press and you want to play zone, but you want to use the wide 9 and kind of the whole menu, right? And in order to have as big of a menu as possible, right? This is where, for me, all of these hires, I get the ideas behind them. I see the vision of what you're trying to instill, but it's going to depend on the players you pick to bring it to life. Because Sean Duggan is talking about odd and even spacing in the run game, right? And talking about 4 down versus going to 3 down linemen with a nose tackle that's shaded on the backside of the center to allow the linebackers to scrape and then trace and fall off and play running back cuts instead of having single gap assignments, which you get with the 4-man spacing where everybody's got a gap and we're going to commit to this gap and we're going to get upfield and we're going to create disruption. Right. And then the wide 9 is, he likened it to, sometimes people just assume that's a pass rush thing, but wide 9 can have an appeal depending on who you're playing to get those guys out there. And your defensive ends in a wide 9 are in these very expanded alignments and sometimes tilted in towards the backfield so that they can take these straight line angles to the quarterback and really stress offensive tackles. And if you do that and you get a run, you're naturally baking in leverage to play the run outside in and set the edge because you have that much width with your wide, hence width, wide 9 alignment. So it was really interesting to kind of hear him get into some of the nuts and the bolts. But he was very emphatic talking about every game is going to be different. Every game is going to have a plan that's a little different. Every personnel that you go against is going to require something different. And talking about being multiple, this was the second question he was asked in the presser. There's a lot of buzzwords to describe defenses around the league. Multiple, aggressive. How would you describe yours? Sean Duggan said, we do want to be multiple, not to say the same buzzwords, but we do want to be multiple. We want to fit to the strengths of our players. We want those guys to go out there and play fast. This is going to fall back into the Bobby Slowik talking point. Know what they're doing and go play 100 miles an hour. So I think when you build it like that, the teaching is simple, but there's levels to it. There's detail to it. They can go play as fast and as violent as they can. You've got to be multiple in this league and present different looks to the offense, or it's going to be potentially a long day. You want to be multiple, but you want to let the players play really fast. So when you apply multiple to an NFL defense, and I'm thinking specifically through the lens of what the Dolphins currently have on the roster, they could say they're going through their roster assessments all they want, but we've been doing ours all season long, right? And we've been in the weeds with this team where they obviously had their own yard to tend to in Green Bay, right? So don't expect them to be totally forthright. And it seems like they're very cognizant of, like, we're still in the process of onboarding with this roster and what we think of these players and studying the film. The key to being multiple is having as many players as you can that can do multiple things. I think that helps the future forecast of Minkah Fitzpatrick potentially staying on the roster, because he could play as a deep safety. He could play on the second level. He could play in the nickel as a nickel defender. He could play man-to-man coverage. He could play zone. You get a guy that checks all those boxes, that's a hard player to eject. And I get it. There's a economic part of the conversation that has to take place. But I contrast that with Ashton Davis, who's an expiring contract, but is typically best high on the roof and playing split half field coverages or playing in the high post and not a part of your run fits and not playing man-to-man coverage and not being somebody that's playing in the intermediate areas, but is more of like a deep player to eliminate explosive plays on the back end with his speed. It's kind of what Ashton Davis does. It's not necessarily what we got from Ashton Davis this year. And a lot of some of the negative plays that we saw from Ashton Davis, I think were as a result of that, right? Some limitations there. You've got corners. Can a guy play press? Can he play zone? Can he play off man? Can he play deep third? Can he play in a half turn? Can he play clouded coverage up underneath and tackle on the perimeter? Can he defend the catch point? Can he defend guys with size? Can he defend guys with quickness? All right. For me, it's kind of a blank slate for cornerbacks. Now, what do you do with Kader Kohou? Do you bring back Kader Kohou? I think he's got the best chance to be a multiple player who could play inside and outside. Right? Kind of like the Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs type of players that were in Green Bay. But Juju Brents is not a particularly multiple corner. He could play cover 3, and he could play a lot of press man or press and stay up in the flats in shallow zone. He's a guy who's under contract. There's not a lot of guys who are under contract at corner next year. I think Jordyn Brooks is somebody who's a multiple. He can blitz. He can line up on the edge. He can line up a stack linebacker. He can play in coverage. He can play the run. He can deconstruct blocks and play off contact. He does everything. And Sean Duggan was very complimentary to Jordyn Brooks. He called his tape inspiring to watch because of how he plays the game. It's good to know for a guy that's going into a contract here. Right? He gets that kind of vote of confidence from a new DC. I think up front, I would put the edge group kind of in the same bucket, where the guys that you do have under contract, Chop's more of the wide 9-ish player. If you build in angles for Chop, I think he's better against the run than what he is when he's in more of tight alignments or he's got to deal with tight ends. And you can navigate that sometimes, but you can't always navigate that. So I think Chop can be a part of the solution. He's got to play better. He's got to rush the passer better. I don't think he's a universal, multiple 3-4, 4-3, hand in the dirt, tight alignment, wide 9. I don't think he can do all of it at a high level. At least he hasn't shown the ability to do that right now. Maybe he develops down the road. They're going to have time because he's on a rookie contract. He's got 2 more years plus a potential 5th-year option. So we'll see. I do think you have some multiplicity with the defensive tackle group. I think when you go odd fronts, which is your 3 down, your odd spacing, your 3-4 stuff, that's where I see Jordan Phillips as a nose. I see Kenneth Grant as somebody who can do both, and I see Zeke Biggers as somebody who is the B-gap defender, whether that's a 4-eye or a 5-tech that's over top, like depending on how you set to formational strength. I think all 3 of those guys as the young guys have some variety or have some role to fill. The question is, what roles do those guys also have the potential to fill in even front, so you're not subbing a guy on and off and giving opposing coaches signals for what kind of spacing they're going to get on the play call based on the personnel that's coming into the game. If Zeke Biggers, for example, can only play a 4-eye or a 5-tech, and if Jordan Phillips can only play 2-gap nose over top of the center, those are personnel tells in the same way that Mike Gesicki was a personnel tell on offense because you pass the ball 80% of the time in 2022 when he's on the franchise tag. Or Jonnu Smith and his role and his utilization and your pass run trends with him as a flex tight end who's a pass catcher. Those are the things you have to be cognizant of, and those players can exist on defense. It's usually a third linebacker and what kind of interior defensive lineman you have on the field. That's the part we have to find out. But if you're aspiring to be multiple, that's where these guys got to spread their wings and deepen their roots across multiple kinds of concepts to minimize their chances of being an opportunity cost for making the coaching staff change and becoming collateral. Chris Tabor asked about pushing boundaries, which I thought was interesting because his units have, for quite some time, pushed the boundaries through the end of the whistle. We're going to talk about that next. Here, stick with us. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but was not the right fit, you know how important fit really is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed someone to hire for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed. Be very specific about what I need with real experience, not just resume buzzwords. And instead of struggling to get your post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with less stress, less time, and more results. By using Indeed sponsored jobs, listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now. Show support by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. If you're hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how our business is run and think there has to be a better way. The good news is you are right. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make, and that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Quo makes everything simple so that your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer as well, so you can keep your existing number. There's no surprise when you hear all that. The Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls and no missed customers. I really like Chris Tabor, man. He talked about his dad, and his dad was a high school football coach. And the weight that he realized coaching had when he saw players his dad used to coach would come over to the house and would want to spend time and would talk about life and football. And I thought that was really, really cool. But the thing that I'm most interested in about from an X's and O's and an execution standpoint of the Chris Tabor special teams unit is this is a unit that has had a lot of high producing players, both in the kicking game and in the return game. But it's also been a unit the last several years that has really pushed the boundaries and been amongst the league leaders in penalties incurred on special teams. And that was a question that he was asked. What's your philosophy and approach to coaching and teaching aggression and effort, but discipline? I asked because there were some situations last year with the Dolphins. This is off the transcript with the Dolphins where there was an attempt to be aggressive or make a play, block an opponent or whatever, and results in penalty. How do you approach that? Well, this was a great question. And it didn't even really get into Tabor's units. But he's like top. His units, Carolina and Buffalo, the last 3 years have been like top 6 in penalties, in both penalties and yardage incurred on penalties in each of the last 3 years. So this question, I think he answers the right way, but it's what he says that was more enlightening, knowing what the penalty numbers are for his units. And this is what Chris Tabor responded to that question with. When you turn the tape on, I want to be a classy, hard-hitting unit that plays with great unity. Within that being classy, it's knowing the rules. I have to be able to push the boundaries, right? I want to be aggressive, but I don't want to be reckless. I'm kind of giving you coach speak right now, but when you're coaching a player and he's going after something like, what's the risk reward? I think that's what you have to live with if that's what you're going to say you're going to be. There's a fine line there, but understanding globally what the game is, where the game is at, and what the situation is. Sometimes you could rush the punter. Everyone says rush a punt and block it, but sometimes you're rushing a punt just to speed up the punter up, and maybe he hits a touchback, and I just picked up bonus yards as opposed to pinning him down there. So what is the mode that you are in? Acknowledge his coach speak, right? But openly admits hard-hitting unit that pushes the boundaries and is aggressive. And if you're willing to live by the sword, then you're also willing to die by the sword. And if that means splash plays, as long as it's not incurring turnovers, right? Like the roughing the punter for 15 yards and an automatic first down when you had a stop in the fourth quarter of the game against the Bills and a tie game on the road, like those are the ones you can't have. Those are the ones you can't justify. But if you execute the same block 5 times and you get a touchdown return on one of them and you get called for a holding at the 35 on another one and you don't get called the other 3 times, that's kind of the aggressiveness and pushing the boundaries, right? And that embodiment of what he's talking about shows up on his units. So I'm just mentally preparing myself for there's probably going to be some frustrating lapses. Now, I think, what was it? Last year it was like 260 yards of penalties. And if you were to divide that by 17 games, about 15 yards of penalty yardage a game. It's a pretty big number, right? Like, I mean, it's top 6 in the NFL. If you can make enough splash plays in that unit of the game, I think I'm probably more willing to live with the cost benefit analysis of pushing the boundaries, because we've known what it has been like to be a passive special teams unit that offers no contributions other than field goals to winning the game, right? The Danny Crossman units in Miami, the 23 special teams unit, the 24 special teams unit were abysmal. They made no positive contributions to the game other than a bad kick by the Jets that Malik Washington returned to midfield with in the final minute of regulation to help you set up a game-tying field goal. So, not surprised to hear that answer be what it is, knowing what Chris Tabor's units have measured in the form of pushing the boundaries with penalties. I don't expect anything to change in that regard. Now, it's just up to the guys that are out there to be smart and pick their spots, or alternatively, make enough splash plays where the splash plays override the penalties because you're pushing the boundaries and you're getting away with it more often than not. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed. Kyle Krabs, you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We got one more coming this week. I hope to see you then. Fins up.